Hi, I'm Michael Green. I'm the Program Manager for Guest Configuration, and I would like to guide you through the docs. First, just making sure everybody understands what guest configuration is. Azure Policy has the ability to audit and assist with releasing change or modifications to things happening in the Azure Resource Manager API. So that would include things like I want to create a storage account or I want to create a virtual machine. But Azure doesn't have the ability to reach inside of virtual machines or other resource types that are created inside the customer's environment. And so that's why we have a service and a virtual machine extension that when the customer enables it, it can reach inside and perform audits, release change, things like that that are happening inside a virtual machine hosted in that customer environment. And this is also supported on Arc. So if you have machines that are outside of Azure, but you are projecting them into Azure as an Arc-enabled server, then it works there as well. So if you're using guest configuration for the first time, I would double check that the Microsoft.guest configuration resource provider is registered for the subscription. In many cases that happens automatically, but there's some edge cases, like if you're using it as a standalone capability outside of Policy or Security Center or Auto Manage, where you might need to do it manually. This one catches a lot of people, so be on the lookout for this. And that is, have you deployed all the requirements, which there's really only two. Your machine needs to have the guest configuration extension, which you'll see as Azure Policy for Windows and Azure Policy for Linux, and the machine needs to have a managed identity. You can easily enable this just using the policy referenced here, deploy prerequisites to enable guest configuration policies on virtual machines. So that's actually an initiative that handles both the identity and the extension requirements for both Windows and Linux machines. So that will make your life super easy. But I've seen a lot of forum posts and even some support cases where people didn't know that they needed to deploy the extension first. And so the results that they see in the portal just say the machine's non-compliant because it's missing prerequisites, extension, or identity, and then they're frustrated. So be on the lookout to understand this one. Also, if you're interested in participating in the public preview of applying changes using guest configuration, make sure your extension is 1.29.24. That's the latest as of this recording. There could be later versions down the road, but that's the latest extension that supports applying configurations through guest config. If you're creating custom content, so maybe you're publishing your own configuration MOF and packaging that as a zip file following the guest configuration module, which you'll also see documented here, that it's important to understand the extension, all extensions in Azure actually, are limited to 5% CPU impact on the machine. And that's to make sure that extensions in Azure don't have much of an impact on production workloads that are being hosted by the customer. But if you are interested in publishing your own configuration, you might find that on a test machine and you're testing that automation in a standalone manner, that it performs faster than what you're seeing in Azure. It's probably because of this 5% CPU limitation. We don't see much of an impact on this in normal cases, but if it was a long-running configuration or if it was something that for some reason there was a performance hit on the machine whenever your custom code was running, there's a limit that prevents that. In terms of tooling, starting with this public preview, we're now focused on desired state configuration version 3, both for Windows and for Linux. We will continue to support Chef Inspect version 2 for custom content, but especially for built-in content and then for the authoring module to assist with the creation of a package and creation of policies. We'll be focused on PowerShell desired state configuration version 3 cross-platform. Once your package has been published and assigned to a machine, you're going to find that the agent inside that machine every 5 minutes is checking for a new assignment. So that could be something that you're publishing directly, that's documented here, or that you're doing via policy, also documented here in the how-to guides section. But the agent's checking every 5 minutes, is there something new for me to handle in terms of a configuration becoming available? Once that configuration has been downloaded and the first audit or apply happens, then every 15 minutes, the machine is going to reevaluate the state of that configuration and report back to the service. The supported client types, this really means like what operating systems do we support? Our goal is that if Azure or Arc supports the operating system, then guest configuration should support the operating system. And I believe we're in sync with that as of this latest publishing. But this is always going to be a moving target. So if something new comes out for Azure or for Arc, our goal is to stay in sync as much as possible, either immediately or as soon as we can. Network requirements. So all the traffic for guest configuration is going over port 443. The service tags, Azure Arc infrastructure and storage are important. Like let's say that you're just using like public IP addresses for your machine, but you want to limit where traffic can go from the machine, and so you use a network security group. You can add these service tags and say traffic is allowed, like deny all but allow to these service tags. The Azure Arc infrastructure tag would handle the guest configuration service requirements. The reason the storage service tag is there is because if you are publishing a custom content package into blob storage, then that's what would allow it to go talk to that storage endpoint. You can also consider using private link, and that's where instead of having the network traffic going to and from the guest configuration agent service going through the network adapter of the VM, it would instead just use a private route through Azure. And if you have a private network and you're only using private networking, this is a great feature to use. But just again, make sure that you're using private endpoints on your storage accounts and using that in your content URI if you're publishing your own content. If you're using built-in content, then you shouldn't need that. And it's enable private network. So the way that this works is you apply a tag to the machine, enable private network GC with value true. Inside the machine, the agent will see that through the instance metadata service and start routing traffic through the private link instead. We do support Arc-enabled servers. All of our policies and the policy definitions that are generated by the guest configuration module include a section in the if condition so that Arc-enabled servers can get picked up and a parameter to decide whether or not you want to enable them. There are scenarios that guest configuration for Arc is a build scenario where it's charged. So you can look at the pricing page to better understand that. But again, that traffic will only use port 443. And if you can use a DNS-based filter, something like a proxy, then this is the URL that traffic will follow. And of course, again, if you are pulling custom content from Azure Storage, then you're going to want to make sure that your storage endpoint also is approved as traffic, so the traffic can reach it. And then it's always the possibility also that if you're in a hybrid scenario and you're managing on-premises servers, that you could host that content package locally within your data center and just have a content URI that points to someplace local. So it's up to you how you want to architect that. That also covers assigning policies outside of machines. You'll notice in the if condition that the hybrid compute type is what's being allowed if that parameter is set to true. All machines that are being managed by guest configuration have to have a managed identity. We currently only support system assigned. This is so that when the agent starts up, it can get a token from IMDS, and when it talks back to the guest agent service and says, what jobs do I have to do, or here's my current status, it can authenticate. And so the nice thing about the extension is that you don't have to send, whenever you add it, like you don't have to add any private strings with shared keys or anything like that. Everything is dynamic and happens automatically because of that authentication token. But it does mean that the machine has to have a managed identity. For availability, we pretty much recommend the same availability procedures as you would see for virtual machines. So what does that mean? It means, like, if you're thinking about how to architect a highly available application, and you're thinking about what if this Azure region should unexpectedly go down, then you're going to, put the application across multiple machines, put it behind a load balancer, separate them by regions, things like that. In Azure, there's this notion of region pairing. So it's documented, and the link is here, but for each region, it has a pair that says, can information that's being stored be automatically replicated across these paired regions. So the way that it works is if you're in a paired region and that region goes down, and that compute instance is offline, then obviously that machine's not online, so it's not being audited and configurations are not being enforced or reported on. But the report, the historical report information is still available because it's replicated to that paired region. And so if you're looking, like if you're building a highly available application and you actually want the application to still be available, that's where you would want to have VMs in multiple locations. But if all you cared about was accessing the historical data, even when that region is down, then the region pairings will help with that. This kind of carries over to data residency, which is just a public acknowledgement that we do store customer data. This is basically like the information that if you did a custom configuration or even built-in configurations, the information returned by those that you see in the portal, well, that's customer data. And you could go write a custom configuration and have it return something that you want to keep track of in terms of like a privacy requirement. So yes, we store it. It is replicated to the paired region. And that's how that historical reporting is still available if one region is down. There are some regions that do not have pairs. So for single resident regions, everything is stored just in that region. And for troubleshooting, a couple of things. Well, the one thing that we have seen people run into is if you take the same guest configuration and you assign it multiple times. So maybe like think about the one that is looking for applications that are installed. If it's assigned like to a whole subscription, we want to go look for application X, but then we assign it again to a resource group looking for application Y. The machine is now going to get 2 guest assignments with different parameter values, and we currently don't support that. So that's something we've run into is, teams need to work together and consolidate those to one policy. This is actually something that we're working on for the future though. And then if you want to troubleshoot, this is super handy whenever you're going through the authoring process. Like maybe it worked on your machine, but then for some reason it's not working in Azure, something like that. Here's the log file location. This will have the verbose output stream from DSC, so you'll be able to help with troubleshooting. And then the location for the logs on Linux machines is actually a little bit different. You see the folder name is different for in Azure versus Arc Connected, but for Windows it's the same. And then I've just got run command scripts here. So if you want to get at those logs without actually going and logging into the machine and potentially making unwanted changes, you can just use run commands, typically what I do when I'm troubleshooting, and go grab the logs. That's really truncated when it comes back. So you want to get your patterns pretty specific, and you can change those to go look for your custom code information. The agent is actually installed at, the agent's installed in the plugins folder in Azure, but for information that has been downloaded, like built-in packages or your custom packages, they're going to get extracted into that program data /guest config /configuration. Then you'll see for every configuration, there's a unique folder name, and then all the requirements for that configuration are extracted there. So we don't put it in like the modules path in program files for PowerShell. For guest configuration, PowerShell is sideloaded, so we manage the version that's on there. It's in the agent directory, so you don't have to pre-install anything. And what's nice is as you add and remove configuration assignments, because all the requirements for each configuration are in a unique subfolder, it doesn't break anything when one is removed. If another configuration is using the same module, it has a separate copy. And then for Linux, it's under var/lib guest config configuration. We do have for all of the built-ins, you can go out to this page, but there's a list of policy definitions, there's a list of built-in initiatives, and there's a samples repo where all of the moth files we use for all the built-ins are there. And then for everything that is written in PowerShell, which is almost everything, the links to the resources that we're using are there as well. So if you want to answer the question, how does this check actually happen? That's the right place to look. The exception are things like baselines that are actually written in C++. It doesn't make any sense to link to those because it's just looking at DLLs and stuff like that. So those aren't linked up out there. And from here, I would go to, if you're interested in learning more of an overview type of information, we've got these links on the side, like how do assignments work? How is guest config, or how's DSC v3 different than previous DSC? Should I understand remediation? But if you want to jump ahead and start authoring your own content, then I've got these links here to set up your dev workstation, how to create and test, and actually how to sign the package if you want to really have a mature environment, how to create the definition, how to assign it, and how to view compliance details. So that is the overview of understanding guest configuration feature of Azure Policy.